I sold roasted chestnuts outside the gates of Buckingham Palace for 19 years. 19. You hear that and you think this man's whole life is a paper bag and a little coal fire. And maybe you're right, but I want to tell you something before I tell you the rest. In 19 years, I saw one thing that I still can't explain to my wife without my voice going strange. And it happened on an ordinary Tuesday, in the middle of a crowd, in front of maybe 200 people who all saw it too. And I've never met a single one of them since who remembers it the way I do. So let me tell it my way, slow, the way it happened, because if I rush it, you won't believe me and I don't blame you. My name is Merk, keep that. You'll want a name to hold on to. The Kingdom of Valmoria is a small place. You could drive across it in an afternoon if the mountain roads let you, which they usually don't. We have one big city, Aldern, and in the heart of Aldern there's a square. And at the top of that square there's Buckingham Palace, all pale gold stone and black iron, with the flag up when the family is home and down when they're not. That morning the flag was up. I remember because I looked at it the way I always did when I wheeled my cart into place. 6 in the morning, still dark, the street lamps buzzing that low buzz they make when the frost gets into them. My hands were cold. My cart wheel had a squeak I'd been meaning to oil since autumn. The square was empty except for the pigeons and a street sweeper named Odo who never said much but always nodded. I nodded back, I set up, I lit my little fire. By 8 the tourists start coming. By 9 there's a proper crowd, all of them pressed up against the black iron fence with their phones out, waiting for the guards. You know the guards. Everybody knows the guards. Tall men in the dark green coats and the black bearskin caps, standing so still that children dare each other to see who can make them blink first. They never blink, that's not a legend. I watched those men for 19 years. They don't blink for the children, it's a point of pride. There was one in particular. I want to describe him properly because he matters. His name, I learned it later from the papers, and even the papers got half of it wrong. His name was Sergeant Thomas Rayner. But I didn't know that yet. That morning he was just the tall one. The one who stood at the east post nearest my cart. He'd been on that post, on and off, for maybe 2 years. And in 2 years I don't think I'd heard him say a single word. He had a face like a closed door. Not unkind, just shut. Gray eyes that looked at everything and gave nothing back. He must have been 40. There was gray coming into his sideburns, the little bit you could see under the cap. I used to talk to him, not because he answered, because I talked to everyone. It's the chestnut business. You stand in one spot all day, you talk or you go mad. Cold one today, Sergeant, I'd say, or the tourists are thick as flies, eh? Nothing, not a flicker. But once, and I swear this is true, once, on a day when a little girl dropped her ice cream and cried like the world had ended, I saw the corner of his mouth move. Just the corner, just for a second. Then it was gone and the door was shut again. I remember thinking, there's a whole man in there, locked up tight, and I wondered what it would take to get him out. I found out. God help me, I found out. Let me set the day for you properly, because the details matter. They always matter more than you think when you're living them. It was late in the season. The kind of gray day where the sky can't decide whether to rain, so it just sits there, low and heavy, like a wet blanket over the whole city. Cold enough that my breath showed. Cold enough that the tourists bought more chestnuts than usual, which was good for me, so I was in a fine mood. There was a school group. I remember the school group because they were loud and they were everywhere. 30 children in matching yellow vests, herded by 2 teachers who'd clearly given up trying to keep them quiet. They kept running up to the fence and pressing their faces against the bars. There was a man selling little flags. There was a woman with a folding easel painting the palace badly. There was an old couple sharing one bag of my chestnuts between them, passing it back and forth, and I remember thinking, that'll be me and my wife in 20 years, God willing. And there was the usual hum, the city hum. Traffic somewhere off past the square, a tram bell, the fountain, the pigeons, 30 children in yellow. You stop hearing it after a while. It becomes the sound of a normal day. Which is exactly why, when the normal day cracked open, everyone felt it before they understood it. Around 11, the gates opened. That's not unusual. The family comes and goes. When a car is expected, 2 extra guards step out and take position, and the crowd goes quiet and hopeful, everyone hopping to see somebody royal, somebody they can photograph and show back home. That morning it was the Duchess. Now I have to explain the family a little, or none of this will land right. The old king had died 2 winters before. Good man. Sad funeral, the whole city out in black. His son took the throne, King Aldous, young for a king, barely 35, married to a woman the people adored, Princess Adele, and they had a little girl, Princess Wren, 5 years old that season. You'd see her sometimes at the window, a tiny thing with dark curls, waving at the crowd, and the crowd would go soft and sigh, the way crowds do at small children. And then there was the Duchess Ilving. The Duchess was the old king's sister, the king's aunt, technically. A grand old woman, 70-something, sharp as a blade and twice as cold. She had her own household, her own cars, her own way of doing things, and she did not, how do I put this politely, she did not warm the room when she entered it. The people were polite about her, but nobody sighed when the Duchess waved. I'm telling you this because it matters for what comes. There was a chill between the Duchess and the young Princess Adele. Everyone in the square knew it, the way you know things in a small kingdom, by rumor and by the set of people's shoulders. Household gossip. Servants talk, servants have cousins, cousins buy chestnuts. I'd heard things. That the Duchess thought Adele was too soft. That Adele thought the Duchess was too hard. Ordinary family poison. The kind every family has. Only these people lived in a palace, so their poison made the newspapers. None of it seemed important. It was just the weather of the place. So when the gates opened and the Duchess's car came through, a long black SUV, the good kind, the armored kind, with the little flags on the front, nobody in the crowd got too excited. A few phones came up. The school group cheered because school groups cheer at everything. The Duchess herself I couldn't see. The windows were dark, the way they always are. The SUV rolled slow through the gate and turned to take the long curve of the drive that loops out toward the main road. And Sergeant Rayner, at the east post, stood exactly as still as he always did. Everything was normal. I want you to hold that in your mind. Everything at that exact second was completely normal. The chestnuts were roasting. The children were yellow. The sky was gray. The car was black. And then a woman screamed inside the palace, and the whole world tipped over. I didn't hear the scream. Not at first. I want to be honest about what I actually experienced, because if I dress it up, I'll lose you. What I saw was this. There's a window on the second floor of the east wing, a tall one, close enough to the gate that on a clear day you can see whoever stands in it. And in that window, suddenly, there was Princess Adele. I knew her at once. Everyone did. Golden hair always up, that face the whole kingdom loved, but she wasn't waving. She was, I don't have a better word, she was clawing at the window, both hands flat on the glass, her mouth open. And even from down in the square, even through glass and distance and the noise of 30 children, you could tell that she was screaming. A few people near me looked up. "What's she doing?" somebody said. A tourist laughed, thinking it was a game, thinking maybe she was playing with a child. But she wasn't playing. You can tell. There's a thing that happens to a person's whole body when it's real, when the fear is real, and her body was doing that thing. She hit the glass with the flat of both hands hard once, twice, and then she pointed. She pointed at the car. The black SUV, halfway down the curve of the drive now, rolling slow toward the road. And I remember, this is the part I can't shake, I remember she looked for 1 second directly down into the square, directly at the guards. as if she was trying to throw her voice down through the glass and the cold and the distance, straight into somebody who could do something. I didn't understand. Nobody understood. How could we? We were 200 people eating chestnuts. But Sergeant Rayner understood. Here's what I need you to picture, and I need you to picture it exactly, because I've gone over it 10,000 times and it never stops giving me chills. The sergeant was 30 meters from that window at least, down at ground level, facing the crowd, not the palace. His back was 3/4 to the window. He should not have seen her. There is no version of the physics of that morning where he should have seen a woman appear in a second-floor window behind his shoulder. But guards see everything. That's the thing people don't understand about standing still. When your body doesn't move, your eyes learn to do all the work. 19 years I watched those men, and I'll tell you, they see a pickpocket in a crowd of 500. They see a bag left too long by a fence. They see a face that doesn't fit. And Rayner saw the princess in the window. I know he saw her because I was watching his face. I always watched his face. It was a habit by then, and I saw the exact instant something moved behind his eyes. The door that was always shut, it didn't open. It just cracked. A hairline. But after 2 years of nothing, a hairline was like a shout. His eyes went up to the window, held there half a second, then snapped to the car. And then he did the thing that I have never, in 19 years, seen a palace guard do. He broke formation. You don't know what that means unless you've stood where I stood. Those men do not move. It is the entire point of them. Fire, rain, insult, a bee on the nose. I have personally seen a wasp walk across a guard's lip, and that man did not so much as breathe wrong. They are trained until stillness is the deepest thing in them. Breaking post is I don't even have a word. It's like a statue stepping off its base. It's wrong. It's against nature. Rayner stepped off his base. He didn't hesitate either, which is the part that still frightens me. There was no moment where he thought about it, no wobble, no glance at the other guard to check. It was as if his body had already decided before his mind caught up. 1 second he was stone. The next second he was moving, fast, faster than a big man in a heavy coat and a tall cap has any right to move. He ran for the car. The crowd made a sound. You know the sound a crowd makes when something goes wrong, that low collective "oh," half gasp, half question. The school group teachers turned. The flag seller dropped his flags. The woman with the easel knocked it over and didn't notice. And me, I'll be honest, I just stood there with my little scoop in my hand, frozen, watching a man in a bearskin cap sprint across the palace drive toward a slow-moving armored car. And my first thought, my very first stupid thought, was, he's going to lose his job. That's what I thought, in the middle of it. He's going to lose his job. I had no idea. None of us did. The SUV was maybe 15 meters from the road gate when Rayner reached it. He didn't bang on the window. He didn't shout stop, or if he did I couldn't hear it over the crowd. What he did was get in front of it. He put his own body directly in the path of a 2-ton armored vehicle, planted his boots, threw up one flat hand and stood there. The car stopped. Hard. You heard the little chirp of the tires and the rock of the suspension. The driver, you could see the shape of him behind the glass, throwing up his own hands, the universal what in God's name gesture. And for one long, awful second, nothing else happened. The car, the guard, the flat hand, the gray sky, 200 people holding their breath. I could hear my own fire crackling. That's how quiet the square went. 30 children in yellow vests, and you could hear a coal pop in my little brazier. Then the driver's window came down and there was shouting, and the back window came down and the Duchess's face appeared furious, absolutely furious, that cold old face gone red, and she was saying something. I couldn't hear what, but you didn't need to hear it to understand the shape of it. How dare you? Move. Now, do you know who I am? And Sergeant Rayner did not move. He said something back, short, just a few words. His face was calm, that shut, closed door calm, but there was something underneath it now, something running fast, and he pointed. Not at the Duchess, past her, into the car, into the back seat. And that's when I saw why the princess had been screaming. Let me stop here. I know that's cruel, to stop here, but I need you to understand something about what it was like to be there, because when I tell people this story, they always want to skip to the end. They want the answer. They want to know what was in the car and why the princess screamed and whether the little girl. And I want to tell them, you weren't there. You didn't stand in the cold with the scoop in your hand. You didn't hear the coal pop. You don't get to skip to the end because I didn't get to skip to the end. I had to live every second of it not knowing, the way you're going to have to live it now. So I'll tell you what I could see, and only what I could see, from 30 meters away with the crowd surging around me. I could see the Duchess in the back, half-turned, arguing. I could see the driver, hands still up. And I could see on the far side of the back seat, low down, almost below the window line, a small shape. A small dark-haired shape moving wrong. The way a small body moves when it's in trouble. I couldn't see her face. I want to be clear. I never saw her face in that moment. But I saw two little hands come up against the far window, the back left window, the one facing away from the crowd, the one nobody could see from where they stood. Nobody except me, because my cart was pushed off to the east side, off to the odd angle, the bad spot, the spot I'd complained about for 19 years because it was too far from the good foot traffic. And from that bad spot, that terrible lucky spot, I watched two small hands beat against the glass of the back left window of the Duchess Ilving's armored SUV. Little hands slapping, then dragging down, then slapping again slower. And I understood, all of us near me understood, all at once, the way a crowd understands a thing before anyone says it, that the small shape in the back seat was Princess Wren. 5 years old, dark curls, the little thing who waved from windows. She was in that car, and something was terribly, terribly wrong. I have to tell you how she got there, though at the time I didn't know, none of us knew, we only learned the shape of it later. But you should know it now, or part 2 won't make sense. The Princess Wren was not supposed to be in that car. She was supposed to be with her mother, Princess Adele, in the East Wing, having her lunch. That was the plan. That was every day's plan. The child had her lunch with her mother at 11:30, and I know that now the way you know things afterward, when everyone's been interviewed and the story's been pieced together like a broken plate. But that morning the plan broke. I'll tell you the how of it in part 2, the real how, the how that made the whole kingdom go cold when it came out. For now, just hold this. A 5-year-old girl was in the back of a departing armored car that her mother had not put her in. Her mother had run to the window screaming, and a guard who had not spoken a word in 2 years had thrown his body in front of 2 tons of steel to stop it. Nobody in that square knew why yet. Rainer didn't fully know why. He just knew, the way you know when you've stood at a post long enough that the post becomes part of you, that a car should not be leaving with a child beating on the glass and a mother screaming from a window. He knew that much, and it was enough to make him break the one rule that a man like him had built his whole self around. He stood in front of the car. He would not move. And behind him the road gate was open, and beyond the road gate was the city, and beyond the city. Well, that's part 2. But before I close this part, I want to give you one more picture, because it's the picture I keep. It's the one I see when I close my eyes. The square had gone silent. The Duchess was shouting. The driver's hands were up. The princess was hammering the upstairs window, and the little girl's small hands were sliding down the glass. And in the middle of all that noise and all that stillness, Sergeant Thomas Rainer turned his head just slightly, just for a second, and he looked up at the window where the mother stood screaming. And he gave her one small nod. I saw it. I don't care if nobody else did. I saw it. One nod, from 30 meters, through glass and gray air and 200 strangers. as if to say, I see her, I've got her, I'm not moving. And the princess in the window went still, just for a heartbeat. She stopped clawing at the glass, and she pressed one hand flat against it, and even from where I stood I could see that she was crying and that she believed him. That nod is the reason I'm telling you this story. Because in 19 years I had watched hundreds of guards stand like statues and give the world nothing, and I had decided, somewhere along the way, that the stillness was all there was, that behind the closed door there was just more door. And in 1 second, one nod, one broken rule, that man showed me I'd been wrong the whole time. There was a whole person in there. And he'd been waiting all those silent years for the one moment that would need him. I left you at the nod. I'm going to keep my promise now and tell you the how of it, how a 5-year-old girl ended up in the back of the wrong car. But I have to warn you that it's the part of the story that still makes the older folk in Aldern lower their voices. It's not a happy how. Nothing about that morning was happy until the very end, and even the end isn't happy the way you'd want. But you asked to hear it, and I said I'd tell it straight. So here it is. The plan, like I said, was lunch, 11:30, Princess Wren with her mother in the East Wing. But that morning there was a change, and the change came from the Duchess. The Duchess Ilvin had decided, nobody asked her to, she just decided, the way she decided everything, that she wanted to take the little princess out for the day. To the country house. 2 hours drive north up into the Green Hills, an old stone place the family kept for summers. The Duchess had spent her own childhood there, and somewhere in that cold, sharp old heart of hers, I think, there was a real thing. She wanted to show the child the house. She wanted, maybe, to be a great aunt for one day instead of a duchess. I've thought about that a lot. I've decided to believe it was a real thing. It makes the rest bearable. The trouble was, the Duchess didn't ask. She informed. She sent word to the household that morning. The child would come with her, the car would leave at 11, see to it. And the household, which was frightened of her the way everyone was frightened of her, saw to it. But Princess Adele was never told. That's the whole crack right there. That's where the plate broke. A message that should have gone up to the mother went sideways instead, lost in the machinery of a big house with too many servants and too much fear of one old woman. Adele thought her daughter was being dressed for lunch. She was setting the little table by the window. She was waiting. And 2 floors down, a nanny who'd been given her orders was buttoning Princess Wren into a warm coat and walking her out to the Duchess's car. That's how a child ends up in the wrong car. Not a kidnapping, not a plot, just fear and silence and a message that went the wrong way in a house where nobody dared say no to the wrong person. Ordinary, that's the horror of it. It was all so ordinary. But here's the part that turned an ordinary mistake into the worst morning of my life. Princess Wren was ill. Not badly, not that anyone knew. She'd had a cough for a day or two, the kind of cough children get, nothing to worry about. But that morning in the car, buckled into a booster seat in the back of a big, warm, armored SUV, with the heaters going full and the windows sealed and the old Duchess up front giving instructions to the driver, that little girl had some kind of attack. The doctors called it something long afterward. I won't pretend I remember the exact word, but the plain of it was this: her airway closed. The cough, the warm, sealed air, some allergy nobody had caught yet, it doesn't matter which. What matters is that a 5-year-old in the back of that car, out of sight of the one adult up front who wasn't even looking at her, began to fight for breath. And she couldn't make herself heard. Think about that. The Duchess was in the front passenger seat, turned forward, talking. The driver was driving. The glass was thick, armored glass, the kind that eats sound. The heaters roared. And behind them, low in the back seat, a little girl was going quietly, terribly into trouble, and the 2 adults in the front of that car did not know. She did the only thing a small body knows to do. She hit the glass. Those little hands I saw sliding down the window, that was her trying to be heard. That was her whole strength going into the one thing she could reach. The window, the glass, slap, slap, drag. And nobody in the front of the car turned around. Now up in the East Wing, Princess Adele was at the window, waiting for a daughter who wasn't coming when she saw the car. She saw the black SUV roll out of the courtyard below, and I've been told the household talked. They always talked that at first she felt nothing but the ordinary annoyance of a busy morning. The Duchess going out. Fine. Good. One less cold presence in the house. And then she saw the small shape in the back seat. And then she understood two things at the same time, and they hit her like a wall. That her daughter was in that car, and that her daughter was in trouble. Because a mother knows. I don't care what the scientists say about it. A mother knows the shape of her own child's distress from 100 meters through armored glass, and Adele knew, in the space of one breath, that the small dark-haired shape hammering the back window was her Wren, and that Wren could not breathe. That's when she started screaming. That's the scream I didn't hear. She screamed and she clawed at her own window and she pointed, and there was no one in that room to help her, and the car was already rolling toward the road, toward the gate, toward the city, gaining speed with every second, carrying her choking daughter away from the only two people in the world, her, and a guard she'd never spoken to who understood what was happening. She couldn't get down there in time. It was 2 floors, corridors, stairs, guards, doors. By the time she reached the courtyard, the car would be gone into the traffic of Aldern and lost, and her daughter would be. She had one hope, and her hope was 30 meters below her, standing at a post in a bearskin cap. So she threw everything she had at the glass, and she pointed, and she prayed that one of those still men who never moved would, for once in their lives, move. And one of them did. Back to the square, back to me and my scoop and my little fire. The car had stopped. Rayner was in front of it. The Duchess was shouting from the back window, and the little hands were sliding down the far glass, slower now, slower, which is the detail that still wakes me at night because I know now what slower meant. The crowd around me had figured out that something was wrong, but they hadn't figured out what. They thought it was a protest, maybe, or a madman, some fool who'd rushed the car. A few people were filming. A few were shouting at Rayner to get out of the way, actually shouting at him, telling him to stop making trouble. I want you to remember that. Half the crowd thought the guard was the problem. That's how it looks from the outside when a man does the right thing fast. It looks like chaos. It looks like he's the one causing it. Rayner didn't hear them, or if he did, he didn't care. He'd gone around to the side of the car by now, the far side, the back left, the side with the little hands, and he was pulling at the door. Locked, of course it was locked. Armored car. Child locks. The whole thing built to keep bad people out and doing its job perfectly, keeping the one good man out too. He hammered the glass with his fist, shouted at the driver. The driver was fumbling, panicking. The Duchess was still not understanding, still shouting about protocol, about who this man thought he was. And Rayner made a decision. He stepped back from the door. He reached to his belt. And I thought, everyone near me thought, oh God, he's got a weapon. This is going worse. This is going to be a disaster. But it wasn't a weapon. Guards at Wenhelo carry a few things on the belt, and one of them, I learned that day, is a tool. A hard, blunt, pointed tool. I don't know the proper name. A window breaker, the kind they keep for pulling people out of crashes. He set the point against the corner of the back left window, armored glass, remember. Glass built to stop a bullet, and he drove his whole weight down onto it. Nothing. He did it again, his whole body. A grunt I heard from 30 meters. The glass starred but held. A third time. And I remember the sound, this awful cracking pop, and a spray of little glass cubes. And the window went white and caved, and Sergeant Rayner reached his bare arm through a hole in bulletproof glass. I saw the blood start on his forearm. I saw it, and he didn't so much as flinch. and he pulled up the lock and yanked the door open, and he reached in and he got the little girl. I've replayed the next part so many times it doesn't feel like a memory anymore. It feels like a painting I once stood in front of for too long. He pulled her out. This tiny thing in a warm coat, dark curls, and she wasn't moving right. Her lips, even from where I stood, her lips were the wrong color. That blue-gray wrong color that you never forget once you've seen it on a child. And this big silent man, this closed door of a man, went straight down onto his knees on the cold stone of the palace drive with the little princess in his arms. And he did something with such speed and such certainty that I understood watching it, that he had trained for exactly this, over and over, for years, waiting for a day that he must have thought would never come. He laid her down. He tilted her head. He looked in her mouth. He turned her a little on her side and did a thing with the flat of his hand against her small back, sharp, controlled, 3 times and then again. And then he bent his big face down to her tiny one and breathed into her. The whole square had gone silent again. The proper silence this time. The silence of 200 people who have all understood at the same moment exactly what they are watching. A man trying to breathe life back into a child. The Duchess had gotten out of the car. She was standing there, this grand old woman, with both hands over her mouth, and every bit of the fury had gone out of her and left something behind that I'd never seen on her face before and never wanted to see again. She looked, for the first time in all my years of watching her sweep in and out of that gate, like an ordinary frightened old woman who had just understood that she had almost let a child die in her own care. The driver was on the phone, shouting for an ambulance. The teachers had turned the yellow-vested children away. 30 small faces pushed into 30 coats so they wouldn't see. And up in the window, 2 floors up, Princess Adele had both fists pressed against the glass and her forehead against the glass between them, watching a stranger fight for her daughter's life on the cold stone below, unable to move, unable to help, able to do nothing but watch and pray to a God she probably hadn't spoken to in years. And Rainer breathed and pressed and breathed. I'm going to tell you how long it lasted, and you're not going to believe me, because I didn't believe it myself when I thought about it afterward. It lasted at most 90 seconds. That's all, a minute and a half, from the moment he pulled her out to the moment it changed. But I have lived a whole life inside those 90 seconds. I have gone back into them again and again, and every time they last 100 years. The coal popping in my brazier, the Duchess's hands over her mouth, the children turned into their coats, the mother at the glass, the blood running down the guard's forearm, dripping onto the stone, and him not caring, not even knowing, all of him poured down into the small, still body under his hands. Breathe, press, breathe. And then, the little girl coughed. I will hear that cough until the day I die. It was small. It was wet and small and awful, and it was the most beautiful sound I have ever heard in my life. This little broken cough and then a gasp, this huge, ragged, desperate gasp, the sound of a body remembering how to want air. And she started to cry. Oh, she cried, thin and high and furious, the way children cry, the outraged cry of a small person who has been through something terrible and doesn't have the words. And that cry went across the silent square like, I don't have the words either, like a bell, like the first bell after a war. And 200 people who had been holding their breath let it out all at once, and some of them were laughing, and some of them were weeping, and a great many of them, I'm not ashamed to say, were both, me included, standing there with my stupid scoop, tears running into my collar, laughing like a fool. Up in the window, Princess Adele's knees went out from under her. I saw her drop. I saw her slide down the glass and out of sight, and I understood that she'd fainted or collapsed or simply let go, because the thing she'd been holding herself up for was over and her daughter was crying, and crying means breathing and breathing means alive. And Sergeant Rainer sat back on his heels on the cold stone, with a crying child in his arms and blood down his sleeve, and his tall cap knocked God knows where in the struggle, his own hair gray and wild. and he held that little girl against his chest, and he didn't smile. I watched for it. He didn't smile. He closed his eyes, and he pressed his lips to the top of her dark curls just once, and he held her, and his shoulders shook, one time, just one, the way a man's shoulders shake when he's holding back a thing too big to let out in front of strangers. Then he opened his eyes, and the door was shut again, and he was a guard again, and he stood up with the child in his arms, and he carried her, steady as anything, toward the palace gate where the household was already pouring out to meet him. The ambulance came 4 minutes later. I know because I timed it in my head, the way you do when time has gone strange. They took the little princess. She was crying the whole time, which everyone kept saying was good. Crying is good. Crying means she's breathing. And the mother, Adele, had gotten herself down to the courtyard by then. I heard. And she rode in the ambulance with her daughter clutched against her. And I'm told she didn't say a word the whole way to the hospital, just held the child and shook. They took Rainer too in the end for his arm. He didn't want to go. He stood at the gate and he actually argued about it. The first time I'd ever heard him string more than 3 words together, because he wanted to go back to his post. There was blood soaking his whole sleeve by then, a serious amount, and this man wanted to go back and stand at his post as though it had been an ordinary Tuesday. They made him get in the second ambulance. I saw them practically push him. And as it pulled away, he looked out the back window, and for a second, I swear this on my 19 years, for a second, his eyes found my cart, my stupid bad luck cart in the bad luck spot, and I lifted my hand. I don't know if he saw me. I like to think he did. The Duchess Ilvain stood in the middle of the emptying square for a long time after everyone else had moved. Alone. This grand, cold old woman, standing by her broken car with the caved-in window, the little cubes of glass all over the seat where a child had almost died on her watch. And nobody went to her. That's the thing I remember. 200 people, and not one of them went to comfort the Duchess, because everybody understood without a word whose fault it was that the child had been in that car at all, whose fear had filled that house, whose silence had sent the message the wrong way. She stood there alone, and she looked very small and very old, and for the first time in my life I felt sorry for her, truly sorry, because I understood that she was going to have to live inside those 90 seconds too, for whatever years she had left, and that she'd have a harder time in there than I would. Then a servant came and took her arm and led her back inside, and the gate closed, and the square was just a square again, with an easel knocked over and flags on the ground and a lot of stunned strangers who would, most of them, tell this story wrong for the rest of their lives. I said at the start that I've never met anyone who remembers it the way I do. Here's what I mean. They remember a guard stopped a car. They remember a child was sick. They remember it turned out all right. What they don't remember, what I don't think most of them ever knew, is the nod. The one Rainer gave the mother before he broke the glass. The I've got her nod from 30 meters, through the noise, before he'd even reached the door. He took the time to do that. In the middle of it, when every second was a second the child wasn't breathing, he took 1/2 second to look up at a screaming stranger in a window and promise her, without words, that he would not fail. And then he went and made it true. I've thought about why he did that. Why a man would spend a precious 1/2 second on a nod when he could have spent it running, and the best I've come up with is this. He knew she couldn't get down in time. He knew she'd have to watch, and he knew that watching, unable to help not knowing, that's its own kind of dying. So he gave her the one thing he could give her across that distance. He gave her someone to trust. He took her fear and he carried a piece of it himself, so she wouldn't have to carry all of it alone. That's not training. You can't train that. That comes from somewhere else. That comes from whatever was behind the closed door. There's more. There's what happened after, to Rainer, to the family, to the kingdom, to me. There's the thing the king did, and the thing the Duchess did, and the thing I did that I've never told anyone, not even my wife. And there's the reason I'm finally telling this now, after all these years to you. That's part 3. But I'll leave you here in the empty square with the gate closed and the flags on the ground, because this is the moment I always come back to. Not the rescue, the after. The quiet after. When the crowd has gone and the danger's past and you're left standing in the cold with your little fire, realizing that you just watched a man become, for 90 seconds, exactly the thing he'd spent his whole silent life getting ready to be. And that most people will never know it happened. And that you'll spend the rest of your life trying to make them understand. For 3 days after, nobody in Aldern talked about anything else. The papers had it, of course. The hero of WNHLLOW, one of them said, with a photo somebody in the crowd had taken, a blurry, terrible photo, the guard on his knees, the child a small dark smudge in his arms. It went everywhere. The whole kingdom saw it. People I'd never met were telling me the story of a thing I'd watched with my own eyes and getting it wrong, and I'd correct them, and they'd look at me like I was the liar. That's a strange thing to be a witness. You'd think it would make you feel important. It just makes you lonely. But I want to tell you the parts the papers didn't have. The parts I got later, some from the household, some from Rayner himself, because yes, I did finally talk to him properly, and I'll get to that. Let me take them one at a time. The little princess. Wren was in the hospital for 2 nights. They gave it a name, the thing that had happened to her, a severe reaction, her airway, the warm, sealed car. She'd have to carry a little pen thing for the rest of her life, one of those injectors in case it happened again. But she was fine. She was completely, entirely fine. She came home on the 3rd day, and the crowd at the gate was enormous. Thousands of people, and when the car came in, a different car, you understand, nobody was putting that child in an SUV for a good while. When the car came in, the little princess was at the window, waving. Dark curls, small hand, waving at the crowd the way she always had, as though nothing had happened, because she was 5 and to her, I suppose, not so very much had. Children are like that. They walk right up to the edge of the worst thing in the world, and then they turn around and ask for ice cream. It's a mercy. It's God's own mercy that they don't understand. And the crowd, thousands of them, didn't cheer. That's what got me. I was there, I'd closed my cart to be there, and I expected a roar. But it went quiet instead. This huge, tender quiet, thousands of people just looking at a small girl in a window, alive, waving, and all of them thinking the same thing, which was, we almost lost you, and we didn't, and thank God. And then somebody started to clap, slow, and it spread, and it grew, until the whole square was applauding a 5-year-old for the simple miracle of being alive to wave at them. I've never heard anything like it. I hope I never do again, because a sound like that means something terrible almost happened, and I'd rather have the quiet. The Princess Adele. The mother. She did a thing that shocked everyone. 3 days after, before Rayner was even fully mended, she went to see him, herself. Not a note, not a servant, not a medal in a box. She went to the little flat where he lived alone, I learned. A small plain place not far from the barracks, and she knocked on his door like a neighbor. Nobody knows exactly what was said. He never told me, and she never told anyone. But the woman who lived across the hall from Rayner saw the princess arrive, and saw her leave an hour later, and said that when the princess came out her eyes were red, and she stopped in the stairwell and had to hold the railing for a moment before she could go on. An hour. She sat with him for an hour, the mother and the man who saved her child. I've made up 100 versions of that hour in my head. In all of them, at some point, she asks him the question everyone wanted to ask. How did you know? How did you see her? You had your back to the window. How did you know? And in all of them, he gives her the same answer, because it's the only answer I can imagine a man like that giving. I didn't know. I just couldn't take the chance that I was wrong. The Duchess Ilving. Here's the one that surprised me. You'd expect her to vanish, To go up to some country house and never show her cold face in the city again, hidden away in shame. That's what everyone expected. That's what the papers wanted. She didn't. 2 weeks after, she called for her car, a normal car this time, and she checked the back seat herself before she got in, I'm told, checked it 3 times, and she had herself driven not to the country but to the barracks, to Rainer. And she did something that a woman like the Duchess Ilving had probably not done in 50 years. She apologized, publicly, on the steps of the barracks in front of whoever happened to be there. This grand, cold, proud old woman stood in front of a sergeant of the guard and she said, and I have this from 3 people who heard it, so I believe it. She said that she had been careless with the most precious thing in the family, that her pride had nearly cost a child her life, and that she owed her great-niece's life to a man she had, 2 weeks before, been screaming at to get out of her way. And then she said the part that I think about most. She said, "You were right to break the rule. I have spent my whole life believing the rules were the most important thing. You taught me in 90 seconds that I was wrong." And Rainer, the men who were there said this too. Rainer didn't gloat, didn't stiffen, didn't do any of the things a lesser man does when a proud enemy is brought low in front of him. He just said, "Ma'am, the child is well, that's all that matters." And then he asked if she was all right, if she was all right. Because he'd seen her face in the square, I think, seen the ordinary frightened old woman under the Duchess, and he knew that she was carrying those 90 seconds too, and that hers were heavier than anyone's. That's the man. That's who he was. He had every right to hate her, and instead he asked if she was all right. The Duchess wept, they said, right there on the steps, and she was never quite the same after, softer, the household said, kinder, easier to be around, as if the fright had cracked something open in her too, as if she'd had her own closed door all those years and it took nearly losing a child to break it down. 2 closed doors, broken open on the same gray Tuesday. The King Aldous gave Rainer a medal, of course, the highest one the kingdom has. There was a ceremony, the whole court, the cameras, the little princess in a blue dress standing beside her father, and the king pinned the medal on Rainer's chest and shook his hand and said the sort of thing kings say. But the real thing, the thing that told you what the king actually felt, happened after the cameras were off. The king asked Rainer what he wanted, not what the kingdom should give him, what he wanted, anything the king said, name it. And everyone expected money, a promotion, a house, a title. That's what you ask for. That's what the moment is for. Rainer asked to keep his post. That was it. That was the whole thing. He didn't want to be moved up, moved inside, made an officer, given a desk. He wanted to go back to the east post, by the gate, nearest the bad luck chestnut cart, and stand there in the cold in his bearskin cap the way he'd stood for 2 years. The king didn't understand at first, asked him to explain. And Rainer said, "This is my favorite thing anyone said in the whole business," Rainer said. "Sir, the reason I saw her is that I was standing exactly where I was supposed to be standing, doing exactly what I was supposed to be doing, for a very long time, on a great many days when nothing happened at all. If you move me somewhere better, I might not be there the next time something does." The king let him keep his post. And so, a month after the most famous 90 seconds in the history of the kingdom, Sergeant Thomas Rainer was back at the east gate of Buckingham Palace, standing perfectly still in the cold, giving the world nothing, exactly as before. Except that now the whole world knew what was behind the door. Now the man himself, because I promised you I'd finally talk to him, and I did, and it's the reason I can tell you the last piece, the piece that explains everything. It was maybe 6 months after. A cold morning early, the square still empty, just me and my cart and my little fire and the buzz of the frosted street lamps. And Rainer was at his post, off duty in a few minutes, the relief guard already crossing the courtyard to take over. And when he came off, they walk a certain way when they come off post, You can tell. The stillness goes out of them and they become men again. When he came off, instead of heading for the barracks, he walked over to my cart. First time in over 2 years. He stood there. I nearly dropped my scoop. And he said, in that low voice I'd heard maybe 5 times total, he said, "You saw it from here, the whole thing." Not a question, he'd known where I was. Of course he had, he saw everything. "I did," I said. He nodded. He looked at the palace. He looked at the spot on the drive where it had happened, where you could still, if you knew where to look, see a faint mark on the stone that the rain hadn't quite taken yet. And then he told me the thing. I didn't ask. He just told me, the way a man tells a stranger a thing he can't tell the people close to him. He'd had a daughter. Years before the guard, before Wenhelo, before the silence. A little girl. And she had died. I won't tell you how, because he told me and it was his to tell and I'll keep it. She had died when she was small, in a way that a father standing 3 meters away could do nothing to stop. Nothing. He'd been right there. And it hadn't mattered. Some things you can't reach in time no matter how close you are. And after that, he said, he couldn't be around people who knew. Couldn't stand the looks. So he'd come to the city and he'd joined the guard. And he'd found the one job in the world where a man is required, professionally, to stand perfectly still and say nothing and let the world roll past him and give it nothing back. The closed door, he'd built it on purpose, brick by brick. But here's the thing, he said, that I've carried ever since. He said, "I thought I was hiding, all those years standing there. I thought I was just waiting to be done, but I wasn't hiding, Merk." He used my name. He'd known it all along. I was standing guard. I didn't know what I was guarding for. And then one morning a car went past with a child in the back beating on the glass, and I understood that I'd been standing there for 2 years for exactly that. For her. For the one I could reach in time. He was quiet a moment. "I couldn't save mine," he said, "but I could stand where I might save someone's. And it turned out that was enough of a reason to keep standing." And then he asked for a bag of chestnuts, and he paid for them, and he wouldn't take them for free no matter how I tried. And he walked off toward the barracks eating chestnuts in the cold. A big, gray, silent man who had just told a chestnut seller the largest thing in his life, and would probably never speak of it again. I never told anyone that, until now, until you. I said at the very start that I've never met anyone who remembers that morning the way I do, and that it made me lonely. I want to end by telling you why I've finally decided to tell it. Rainer died last winter. Old, in his sleep. In that same small plain flat. He'd retired from the guard a few years back, and I'd lost track of him the way you lose track of people. And then one morning I opened the paper and there was the small notice, and the same terrible blurry photo they always used, the one from the square. The funeral was small. That surprised me. You'd think the hero of Wenhelo would get a great send-off. But he'd asked for small, and small he got, a handful of old guardsmen, a few household people, me. And one other. A young woman I didn't recognize at first. Dark hair. Standing at the back in a plain coat, alone, crying quietly the way you cry for someone who mattered more than the crowd around you understands. It was Wren. Not a little girl anymore. Grown. 20-something. The princess, all grown up, come to the funeral of the man who'd knelt on the cold stone and breathed his own breath into her when she was 5 years old and couldn't do it herself. She'd come alone. No cameras, no household, no fuss. Just a young woman at the back of a small funeral, saying goodbye to a man she was too young to properly remember, whom she owed everything to, every single day of her life since. I went up to her after. I don't know what possessed me. I said, I was there, that morning. I sold chestnuts by the gate. I saw the whole thing. And she looked at me, those same dark eyes, and she said, "Then you're the only other person here who really understands what he did." And we stood together for a while in the cold, the chestnut seller and the princess, 2 people who remembered a thing the world had mostly forgotten, and neither of us said anything, because there wasn't anything to say that would be big enough. That's when I decided to tell it. Standing there, I decided that a thing that good should not be allowed to fade just because the man who did it was too quiet to ever tell it himself. So here it is, all of it. The car, the glass, the little hand sliding down, the nod, the blood on the stone, the cough, the crowd, the door that stayed shut for a whole life, and then opened for 90 seconds when it mattered most. I've told it as true as I can. Some of it I saw and some of it I was told, and I've tried to keep the two straight so you'd know which was which. But the heart of it, the guard breaking formation, the child, the 90 seconds that I saw with my own eyes, from the bad luck spot, from the cart I'd cursed for 19 years and would never curse again. Because that spot let me see the one thing nobody else could. The little hands on the far window, and a man who saw them too. People ask me sometimes what I learned from it. They expect something neat. Here's the truest thing I've got. We spend so much time deciding who people are from the outside. We look at a man standing still and silent, and we think there's nothing in there. We look at a cold old woman and think there's no warmth in her. We look at a bad luck spot and think nothing good will ever come of it. And we're wrong every time we're wrong. There was a whole man behind that door. There was warmth under that old woman's ice. And the worst spot in the whole square turned out to be the only place on earth from which a certain thing could be witnessed and remembered and one day told. You don't know what's inside the still, quiet ones. You don't know what they're standing guard for or who they're waiting to reach in time. So be kind to them. Talk to them, even when they don't talk back. Say good morning to the guard. Buy the old woman a bag of chestnuts. Stand in your own bad luck spot and do your small work faithfully on all the ordinary days when nothing happens at all. Because you never know which Gray Tuesday is the one you've been standing there for your whole life. Sergeant Tomas Rayner stood at his post for years and gave the world nothing, and then he gave it everything, and then he went back to giving it nothing, and then he died quiet in a small room and hardly anybody knew. But I knew. And now you do too. And that's enough. That's the whole reason. That was always the whole reason. Some doors only open once, but once is enough if there's someone standing there to see it.